This is your sign to try rice paper sails for your next cake. They're surprisingly easy to make and instantly elevate the look of any design. Here's a close-up of what they look like on my mermaid cake design. I'm going to show you step by step how to make them. First, grab a bowl and add some warm water. Definitely doesn't need to be boiling hot, but as long as the water is warm or even a little bit hot, it'll work great. Next, you're going to add the food coloring of your choice. I went with sky blue. Then you're just going to give it a stir to dissolve all of the gel coloring. Next, you're going to grab your rice paper. This is the one that I purchased. There's so many different brands, but honestly, any will work just fine as long as the ingredients are only rice, water, and tapioca for the best flexibility. I always like to break off a piece and test it first because, like I said, the water always looks darker than it actually is, which in this case it definitely was, so I add some more food coloring and give it a good stir. I break off another piece of that rice paper to test it, and this is exactly the color that I was going for, and I even pulled out the first piece for reference. Here's what they look like side by side, and now I can dip the rest of my rice paper. Before you start dipping any rice paper in the water, you're going to grab a pan and some parchment paper. I move it right next to the bowl, and now I start adding the rice paper. I do 2 at a time. I've done 4 or 5, but starting off with 2 is probably best because they do start getting stuck together in the water. We're basically just going to swirl these around in the water for about 30 to 60 seconds. The texture of the rice paper before it gets wet, while it's still dry in the package, it's very, very thin and delicate. It breaks very easily. But the second you get it wet, it turns into this sort of like slimy, wet, gooey texture. After those 30 to 60 seconds in the water, you just carefully place them onto that parchment paper. You can lay them however you want depending on the shape you're going for. I usually just like to scrunch them up to give them some shape. And I do want to mention that using parchment paper is probably the most important step because in the past I've tried using aluminum foil and it just doesn't work. I've also tried using some nonstick spray directly on the pan, also does not work. Parchment paper is definitely your best bet. Once you finish laying those out, it's time to put them in the oven. You're going to turn on your oven at the lowest setting. Mine is 170, so I turn it on and place them inside. I leave them in there for about 60 to 90 minutes, and about halfway through, I'll even pull it out and flip them over so that way both sides dry out evenly. And here's what they look like once they're all done. They are pretty fragile, so I just recommend being very careful when handling them or placing them in the cake. I also love that you can take it a step further by adding extra details like painting some edible gold luster dust to the edges, or you can even add edible glitter spray or pearl luster spray before they go in the oven. And that's it, super simple. Let me know if you try them out.